Yeah, boy. Oh, oh. There we go. Testing. Biggity, testing. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, the soon to be platinum plat winner of the world, your boy Stingray Cool with that. Stingray Cool podcast. And if you ain't down with that, I got two words for you: blowfish. Redfish, bluefish, knick-knack, paddywhack. We about to do the continuation of why jazz is important to the culture of the world. I'm gonna have to change that one. Yeah, I forgot. Read Matthew chapter 6, Ephesians chapter 12, Ephesians chapter Corinthians chapter 1. Let's get to finish this continuation. Let me see where we was at. All right, see the rose women, rose of Jews. All right, here we go. Origins and early history. Jazz originated in the late 19th to early 20th century. It developed out of many forms of music, including blues, spirituals, hymns, marches, vaudeville, song, ragtime, and dance music. It also comprehended interpretations of American and European classical music, intertwined with African enslaved folk songs and the influences of West African culture. Its comparison and style have changed many times and throughout the years, in which each performer's personal interpretation and improvising, which is also one of the greatest appeals of the genre, I meant to say, blended African and European music sensibilities. By the 18th century, slaves in the New Orleans area gathered socially at the special market in an area in which later became known as Congo Square, famous for its African dances. And by 1866, the Atlantic slave trade had brought nearly 400,000 Africans to North America. The slaves came largely from West Africa, in the greater Congo River basin, and brought strong musical traditions with them. The African traditions primarily used a single line melody and called and response pattern. And the rhythms have a counter metric structure and reflects African speech patterns. In 1886, the account says that they were making strange music. Haha, strange music box. Strange music. It's strange music, baby. In case you wonder, there's a Tech 9 reference to his record label. 3 at that I hit you with. Criollo on an equally strange variety of instruments, washboards, wash tubs, jugs, boxes beaten with sticks or bones, and a drum made by stretching skin over a flour barrel. Lavish festivals with African-based dances to drums were organized on Sundays at Place Congo or Congo Square. In New Orleans until 1843, there are historical accounts of other music and dance gatherings. Elsewhere in the southern United States, Robert Palmer said of persuasive slave music, usually such music was associated with annual festivals, let me say, when the year's crop was harvested and several days were set aside for celebration as late as 1861. A traveler in North Carolina, stand up, North Carolina, come on, raise up, take a shut up. You represent North Carolina. But anyway, saw dancers dressed in costumes and included headdresses and cowtails and heard music provided by a sheepskin covered gumbo box. Apparently, a frame drum, triangles, and jawbones furnish the auxiliary percussions, and there are quite a few accounts from the southeastern states in Louisiana dating from the period of 1820 to 1840. Some of the earliest Mississippi Delta settlers came from the vicinity of New Orleans, where drumming was never actively discouraged for very long, and homemade drums were used to accompany public dancing until the outbreak of the Civil War. Another influence came from the harmonic style of hymns of the church, which black slaves had learned and incorporated their own music as spirituals. The origins of blues and undocumented though they can be seen as the secular counterpart of the spirituals. However, as Gerhard Kubik points out, wherever the spirituals are homophonic, rural blues and early jazz was largely based on the concepts of heter- heterophos- heterotrophy. Heterotrophy. That's the one. During the early 19th century, as increasing numbers of black musicians learned to play Europe instruments. My bad. Here we go. European instruments, particularly the violin, during the early 19th century, an increasing number of black musicians learned to play European instruments, particularly the violin, which they used to parody European dance music in their own cakewalk dances. In turn, Europe American jazz minstrel show performers in blackface popularized the music internationally, combining psychocation, synthesizer, I think it's synthesizer, my bad, with European harmonic accompaniment. In the mid 1800s, the white New Orleans composer Louis Maru Gottschalk, that name sounds familiar. I think I heard about him before in my history book. Shout out to my history teacher from back in the day. We're going to call her Mrs. Blowfish. We're going to keep her birth name hid. God do sound familiar to me. Adapted slave rhythm and melodies from Cuba and other Caribbean islands into piano salon music. New Orleans was the main nexus between the Afro-Caribbean and African American cultures. Learn something new every day. Oh, they even got little samples for the music. Yeah, that was a quick sample. African rhythmic retention. Oh, see also traditional sub-Saharan African harmony. The black codes outlawed drumming by slaves, which meant the African drumming traditions were not preserved in North America, unlike in Cuba, Haiti, and elsewhere in the Caribbean. African-based Rhythmic patterns were retained in the United States in large part through body rhymes such as stomping, clapping, and patting, juba dancing, whatever that is. Sounds cool though. Might be like hip dancing or something. My hips don't lie, like Shakira, Shakira. In the Pina jazz historian Ernest Borman, what preceded New Orleans jazz before 1890, was Afro-Latin music, similar to what was played in the Caribbean at the time. A three-stroke pattern known in Cuban music as Ostracillo, S-T-R, Tresilo, for people who might want to spell it. In the fundamental rhythmic figure heard in many different slave music in the Caribbean, as well as Afro-Caribbean folk dances before in New Orleans, Congo Square, and Gottschalk's composition. For example, Sylvanus from Havana in 1859, Trujillo's Song Below, and the most basic, most prevalent double pulse rhythmic cell in sub-Saharan African music traditions and the music in African composer. And basically, what I just played you a sample on. Hopefully, I heard it through the microphone. Trujillo was heard predominantly in the New Orleans second line music and in other forms of popular music from the city from the turn of the 20th century to present by the large simpler African rhythmic patterns survived in jazz because they could be adapted more readily in European rhythmic concepts. And jazz historian Gunter Schuller observed from some survived, I meant to say. That's what it says. Others were discarded as the Europeanization progressed. In the post-Civil War period after 1865, African Americans were able to obtain surplus military bass drums, snare drums, and fifes. And an original African American drum and fife music emerged featuring tristelo and related syncopated rhythmic figures. This was a drumming tradition that was distinct from its Caribbean counterparts, expressing an uniquely African American sensibility. The snare and bass drummers played syncopated cross rhythms, observing the writers Robert Palmer speculating that this tradition must have dated back to the later half of the 19th century, and it could have not developed its first place, and if there hadn't been a reservoir of polymetric sophistication in the culture it nurtured. See, is anyone? All right. See anyone in the chat? Let me get back to this. Afro-Cuban influence. The African-American music began incorporating Afro-Cuban rhythmic motifs in the 19th century, where the habanera, Cuban contradanza, gained international popularity. Musicians from Havana and New Orleans would take the twice daily ferry between both cities to perform, and the habanera quickly took root in the musically fertile Crescent City. John Storm Roberts states that the musical genre habanera reached the U.S. 20 years before the first rag was published. For the more than quarter centuries in which the cakewalk, ragtime, and proto-jazz was performing and developing, the habana, a consistent part of African American popular music. Habaneras was widely available at sheet music and were the first written music of which was rhythmically based on the African motif in 1803. From the perspective of African American music, the habanera rhythm, also known as Congo, Congo, or tango means I should say, can be thought of as a combination of striscello and backbeat. The habanero was the first of many Cuban music genres which enjoyed periods of popularity in the United States and reinforced or inspired the use of Tricelo rhythm, rhymes in African American music. Yeah, boy. New Orleans native Louis Mayu Gottschalk's piano piece Ojos Criollos Dance Cabini in 1860 was influenced by the composer's studies in Cuba. The habanera rhythm is clearly heard in the left hand in Gottschalk's symphonic work A Night in the Tropics. In 1859, the Tresillo variant Cinquello appears extensively. The figure was later used by Scott Jocelyn and other ragtime composers, comparing the music of New Orleans with the music of Cuba. Wynton Marsalis observes that Tresillo is New Orleans clad, a Spanish word meaning code or key, has the key to a puzzle. Clave, I think it is, or clave, or cleave. It's CLAVE. So y'all can guess how to spell it, how to spell it, how to pronounce it yourself. What I'm trying to say. Key to the puzzle of mystery. Although the pattern is only half a clave, Marcellus makes the point of the single celled figures the guide pattern of New Orleans music. Jelly Roll Morton called the arithmetic figure the Spanish tingue, and considered an essential ingredient of jazz. Ragtime, one of my favorite variations. Love ragtime music. Ragtime music will always be dope. The abolition of slavery in 1865 led to a new opportunities for the education of freed African Americans. Although strict segregation limited employment opportunities for most blacks, many were able to find work in entertainment. Black musicians were able to provide entertainment in dances, minstrel shows, and vaudeville, during which time many marching bands were formed. Black pianists played in bars, clubs, and brothels. Think brothels like hoes and prostitution. As ragtime developed, ragtime appeared as sheet music, popularized by African American musicians such as the entertainer Ernest Hogan, whose hit songs appeared in 1895. 2 years later, Vince Osmond recorded a medley of these songs as a banjo solo known as Ragtime Melody. Also in 1897, the white composer William Creel published his Mississippi Rag as the first written piano instrumental ragtime piece, and Tom Turpin published his Harlem Rag, the first rag published by an African American. Classically trained pianist Scott Joplin produced his original rags in 1898, and in 1899 had an international hit with Maple Leaf Rag, a multi-strain ragtime march with full parts that feature recurring themes and a bass line with copious seventh chords. Its structure was the bias. Its structure was the basis for many other rags and syncopses. Structure was the basis for many. In the right hand, especially in the transaction between the first and second strain, were novel at a time. At the time, in the last four measures of Scott Zoffalin's Maple Leaf Rag, I guess like Canadian Maple Leaf. African-based rhythmic patterns such as Treselo and its variants, the habanera rhyme in Cinquello, and the herd ragtime composition of Javelin and Turbine. Yeah. Javelin Solis, 1909, is generally considered to be the in the habanera genre. Both of the pianist's hands played in a syncopated fashion, completely abandoning any sense of march. Rhythm Ned Suplente postulates that in the Tresillo Habanera rhythm found in Way and Ragtime in the Cakewalk, whilst Robert suggests the habanera influence may have been part of what freed black music from ragtime European bass. Well, bass, I meant. Yeah, bass, B-A-S-S. Make sure ain't no one in the chat. Blues, African Genesis. Blues is the name of given to both musical form and music genre, which originated in African American communities, primarily the Deep South in the United States at the end of the 19th century. From their spirituals, works, songs, field hollers, shouts, and chants, and rhyme simple narrative ballads. The African use of pentatonic scales contribute to the development of blue notes. In blues and jazz or Cuban explains, I like this version. Wikipedia that. So you got the little thing, they got the little beats you can play. Let's give you a sample. Let me see. Blues is the name given to both musical form and music genre, which originated in African American communities, but primarily the Deep South in the United States at the end of the 19th century. From their spirituals, work, songs, field hollers, shouts, and chants, and rhyme simple narrative ballads. The African use of pentatonic scales contributed to the development of blue notes, I meant to say, in blues and jazz. As Kubrick explains, many of the rural blues of the Deep South are statistically an extension of and merger of basically two broad accompanied song style traditions, West Central Sudanic belt, a strongly Arabic Islamic song style as found as example among the Hausawa, Hausa. So like whoever might know what that means, if I said it wrong, if I pronounce it wrong, you will know. It is characterized by the melisma, wavy, that's Melisma, wavy intention, pinch, stabilities within a pentatonic, Pentationic. See? framework and a see DECL declamatory voice DECLAMATORY. So whoever hear me spell this will know how it's actually word pronounced. If I'm wording it wrong and not wording it right, correct. An ancient West Central Sardinic stratum of pentatonic song composition, often associated with simple work rhythms in a regular meter, but with noble offbeat. Duh, W period C, W period C period. Handy early published blues. Oh, that's an actual person. I ain't know it was a company what, but here we go. About to find out. Early published blues dub period C period. Handy became interested in folks blues in the deep south while traveling through the Mississippi Delta in this folk blues form. The singer would improvise freely within a limited melodic range, sounding like a field holler, and the guitar accompaniment was slapped rather than strummed like a small drum, which responded in hmm, syncopated SYNCOPATED accents. Because you know how to spell accents, ACCENTS. Like functions with another voice. Handy and his bands were formerly trained African American musicians who had not grown up with blues, yet he was able to adapt the blues to a larger band instrument format and arrange them in a popular music form. Handy wrote about his adoption of the blues. The primitive Southern Negro, as he sang, was sure to bear down on the third and seventh tone of the scale, slurring between major and minor, whether it is in the cotton field or the delta on the live up St. Louis way. It was always the same to then. However, I had never heard this slur used by a more sophisticated Negro or by any white man. I tried to convey this effect by introducing flat thirds and sevenths. Oh, here we go. Now called blue notes into my song. Although its prevalent key was major, and I carried the device into my melody as well. Publications and publications. I meant to say publications. All right, publications. Yep. In his Memphis Blues, of his Memphis Blues, sheet music in 1912 introduced 12-bar blues to the world. Although Gunter Scholar argued that it is not really a blues, but more like a cakewalk. This composition, composition. Yeah, here we go. As well as the later St. Louis blues and others included the habanera rattle and would become jazz standards. Hindi music career began in the pre-jazz era and contributed to the codification of jazz through the publication of some of the first jazz sheet music. New Orleans, God Almighty. Yeah, we come out with a part three of this. It's a lot of information. New Orleans. The music of New Orleans had a profound effect on the creation of the early jazz. In New Orleans, slaves could practice elements of their culture such as voodoo and playing drums. Many early jazz musicians played in the bars and brothels in the red light district around, in case anyone else, a Ludacris first to 2005 album, Red Light District. And around Basson Street called Storyville. In addition to the dance bands, there was marching bands which played at lavish funerals, later called jazz funerals. The instruments by the marching bands and the dance bands became the instruments of jazz brass, drums, and reeds tuned in the European 12-tone scales. Small bands contain a combination of the self-taught and normally educated musicians such as from funeral procession tradition. These bands traveled in black communities in the Deep South, many from funeral processions. No, many from the funeral processions tradition. Let me phrase that one. These bands traveled in black communities in the Deep South, many from the funeral processions traditions. Oh, here we go. Damn, backtrack. Here we go. Beginning in 1914, Criollo and African American musicians played in vaudeville shows which carried jazz to beginning in 1914. Criollo. Oh, here we go. In cities in northern and western parts of the U.S., jazz became international in 1914 when the Criollo band. Cities northern and western parts of the U.S. became popular in 1914. Creole bands with cornetist Freddie Capert performed the first ever jazz concert outside of the United States and at the Pantages Playhouse Theater in Canada. Winnipeg, Canada, I meant to say. Oh, Canada. Playhouse Theater in Winnipeg, Canada. Playhouse Theater, Winnipeg, Canada. All right. The Playhouse Theater in Winnipeg, Canada. Thank goodness I got my glasses on. These words kind of small on this doggone Wikipedia, but we working with it. In New Orleans, and the white band leader named Papa Jack Lynn integrated blacks and whites in his marching band. He was known as the father of white in hold up, the father of white jazz because he of the many top players and he employed such as George Brunis, Shakir Banano, and future members of the original Dixieland Jazz Band. This back when it's spelled Jass instead of Jazz. I guess it would have been controversial naming it spelling Jass because that was more sensitive now. No, that wasn't it more sensitive now then, but there was more cautious then than now. So everybody like, man, don't say Jass, say Jazz. Band during the early 1900s, jazz was only now it's spelled again Jazz was mostly performed in African American and mulatto communities due to the segregation laws. Basically, I think mulatto was mixed people. Storyville brought jazz to a wider audience through tourists who visit the port city of New Orleans. Many jazz musicians from African American communities were hired to perform in bars and brothels. These included Buddy Bolden, name sound familiar, and Jelly Roll Morton. Of course, heard that earlier. In addition to those from the other communities such as Lorenzo Tio and Acid Nunez, Louis Armstrong, the legend Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, the man, you gotta check him out. I might have to do a video just him by himself one day. And started his career in Storyville and founded success in Chicago. Shout out to CHIGAG, yo. Final ticket, here we go. Here we go. Forget about them other styles. Conflict called it rodeo. What's again? Homewood. Common, Kanye West, Crucial Conflict, Do or Die, and the Speed Knot Boys, Twister, The Snipers, Lupe Fiasco, Chance the Rapper, Storyville was shut down by the U.S. government in 1917. Consists Buddy Bolden played in New Orleans from 1895 to 1906. No recordings by him existed. His band is credited with create the Big Four, the first sympathetic bass drum pattern to deviate from the standard on the beat march. As an example below shows the second half of the Big Four pattern, the Habana rhyme. Afro Creole pianist Jelly Roll Morton began his career in Storyville. He toured Vaudeville show in southern cities Chicago and New York City in 1905. He composed Jelly Roll Blues, which became the first jazz arrangement in print. When it was published in 1915, it introduced more musicians to the New Orleans style. Morton considered the Tresillo, in case you want to spell it, Tresillo, and Habanera, in case you want to spell it, it's Habaner, which is called Spanish ting, an essential immigrant of jazz. Now, in one of my earliest tunes, New Orleans Blues, you can notice the Spanish ting. In fact, if you can't manage to put tings of Spanish in your tunes, you will never be able to get the right seasoning. I call it for jazz. An expert of New Orleans blues is shown below, and the expert in left hand plays and Tercel rhyme, while the right hand plays variations on sequillo. Let's see. Morgan was crucial innovator of the evolution from the early jazz forms known as ragtime and jazz piano, and could perform pieces of either styles. In 1938, Morgan made a series of recordings for the Library of Congress. Libray, in case you want to spell it, you'll know what it means if I messed up. In which he demonstrated the differences between the two styles, Morton's solos, however, where he still closed to ragtime and were not merely improvisation over chord changes and as in later jazz, but its use of the blues was of equal importance. So that's the last part for part two. Part three coming up might be part 4, 5, and 6 too. That's it for tonight's show. Tomorrow we talk about swing in the early 20th century. Then after that, other regions, then jazz age, then as a good amount, Dungeon Family and Outcast Fate, and the show go on, so on and on and on. So we out. Like, share, and subscribe. Remember, peace, love, and God bless. And we out tomorrow. Into tomorrow. Remember, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. This whoever believe in him should not perish but have an everlasting life. Peace. Remember, God love you and we love you too.